Oscar makes an insane statement for the rest of the championship. Fernando gets blasted for complaining all race, and Leclerc makes a huge statement about his future. Let's get into the latest F1 news. The Singapore Grand Prix just delivered one of the most controversial moments of the Formula One season, and it has everything to do with McLaren's Golden Boys going wheel to wheel in ways that left everyone talking. What happened between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri on lap 1 has sparked a massive internal investigation at McLaren. And the fallout might just reshape how this championship-winning team handles their star drivers going forward. Picture this: Turn 3 at Marina Bay, two Papaya cars side by side, and suddenly we've got contact that sends shockwaves through the entire McLaren operation. Norris made an aggressive move to the inside, Piastri held his ground, and when the dust settled, one driver was furious, while the other drove away with damaged bodywork, but a clear track ahead. The immediate aftermath was electric with tension. Piastri's radio crackled with frustration as he questioned whether it was acceptable for his teammate to barge past him like that. The Australian didn't mince words, calling the move completely unfair and demanding to know if McLaren would intervene. The team's response? They weren't swapping the positions back, and Piastri would have to live with it. What makes this situation absolutely fascinating is the context surrounding it. McLaren has spent this entire season walking a tightrope between team success and individual driver ambitions. They've already secured the Constructors' Championship, their second consecutive title, but both drivers are still mathematically in the hunt for the individual crown. The pressure cooker environment has been building all year long. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella faces an impossible balancing act here. His philosophy centers around what he calls fair racing and sportsmanship as guiding principles. The team has built its identity around letting their drivers race freely, but what happens when that freedom creates internal chaos? Stella emphasized that winning the Constructors' Championship and pursuing individual glory operate on completely independent tracks, regulated by fundamental principles rather than team orders. The Singapore incident becomes even more complex when you consider recent history. Just weeks earlier at Monza, Piastri graciously gave up position to Norris following a team strategy error. That act of sportsmanship now feels like it's creating an expectation of reciprocity that wasn't met when the roles were reversed. The Australian's frustration bubbled over not just during the race, but continued into the post-race ceremonies where he appeared to disconnect his radio while team CEO Zak Brown was congratulating him. Stella's approach to resolving this controversy reveals the sophisticated thinking required to manage two elite drivers with championship aspirations. He refuses to make snap judgments about whether Norris deserves praise for being aggressive or criticism for being reckless. Instead, McLaren is conducting what he describes as a detailed, analytical review that considers both drivers' perspectives before forming any conclusions. The team boss acknowledges the fundamental difficulty of their situation. When two teammates are competing for the same championship, they simply cannot have identical interests. This creates an inherent tension that McLaren has chosen to embrace rather than suppress through team orders. Stella takes pride in maintaining what he calls the let them race concept, even knowing it guarantees difficult moments like Singapore. What's particularly striking is Stella's emphasis on trust as being more foundational than championship points themselves. He recognizes that how McLaren handles this controversy will determine whether both drivers continue believing in the team's fairness and integrity. Get it wrong, and you risk losing the confidence of drivers who have been instrumental in the team's recent success. The review process itself demonstrates McLaren's commitment to thoroughness over speed. Rather than making quick decisions based on initial reactions, they're taking time to examine every angle of the incident. Stella mentions the need for sophistication and detail, acknowledging that multiple elements must be considered before drawing any conclusions. This methodical approach aims to preserve both drivers' trust in the team's decision-making process. Looking forward, this incident represents a crucial test of McLaren's management philosophy. They've successfully navigated previous contentious moments between Norris and Piastri, largely because both drivers have bought into the team's approach. Stella expresses genuine pride in how both have contributed to maintaining team harmony despite the inherent competitive tension. The championship implications add another layer of complexity. With Piastri holding a points advantage over Norris, every position matters enormously. The Singapore clash reduced that gap, creating additional pressure on future race situations. McLaren must now prove they can maintain their principled approach while managing two drivers who are increasingly desperate for individual success. This controversy ultimately reflects the broader challenges facing Formula One teams with genuinely competitive driver pairings. McLaren's response will likely influence how other teams handle similar situations, making their internal review process crucial for the sport's future. The Singapore incident has become a defining moment that will shape McLaren's driver management philosophy and potentially determine who emerges as their primary championship contender in the seasons ahead. What happens when a 7-time world champion gets a 5-second penalty and still finds a way to inspire millions? Lewis Hamilton just dropped a bombshell statement that's completely changing how we think about failure in Formula One. Picture this: Singapore Grand Prix, sweltering heat, brake failures, track limit violations, and a penalty that drops you from 7th to 8th place. For most drivers, that's a weekend to forget. But Hamilton? He's turned it into a masterclass on resilience that every Ferrari fan needs to hear. The drama unfolded in typical Singapore fashion. Hamilton was running a risky two-stop strategy, while his teammate Charles Leclerc battled brake issues from lap 1. As the race progressed, Hamilton's brakes began failing too, forcing him into desperate defensive moves against his former teammate Fernando Alonso. The result? Multiple track limit breaches and a post-race penalty that cost him a position. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of sulking about the penalty or making excuses, Hamilton took to Instagram with a 257-word statement that's got the entire Formula One world talking. And trust me, this isn't your typical driver damage control. Hamilton starts by addressing something deeply personal: the recent loss of his dog Roscoe. He talks about finding light in darkness, about gratitude in the face of adversity. But then he pivots to something that should have every Ferrari strategist taking notes. He calls out what he terms the media headlines. You know, those stories that focus purely on what went wrong, the penalties, the disappointments, the failures. Hamilton says there's another story being written, one that the headlines miss completely. It's the story of how Ferrari responds when things go sideways. Think about this for a moment. Hamilton could have easily thrown Ferrari under the bus. The brake failures, the strategic miscalculations, the fact that he hasn't stepped on a podium since joining the Red Team. Instead, he's defending them, praising their response to adversity, and positioning Singapore as the perfect example of progress. This is psychological warfare at its finest. Hamilton isn't just managing his own reputation. He's reshaping the entire narrative around Ferrari's 2024 struggles. He's telling the world that what looks like failure from the outside is actually the foundation for future success. But let's dig deeper into what actually happened in Singapore. Hamilton was one of the few drivers brave enough to attempt a two-stop strategy in a race where track position is everything. Ferrari even moved Leclerc aside in the final stint to give Hamilton a clear shot at overtaking Kimi Antonelli for 5th place. The strategy was working until the brake issues escalated. Hamilton found himself desperately defending against Alonso, missing an estimated 10 braking zones as his car's stopping power deteriorated. The 5-second penalty was inevitable, but Hamilton held on by just 0.4 of a second on track. Here's what makes Hamilton's response so brilliant. He acknowledges the penalty without dwelling on it. Instead, he focuses on what Ferrari got right: the strategy. In a sport where teams often play the blame game after disappointing results, Hamilton is highlighting the positives while accepting responsibility for his part in the outcome. The timing of this statement is crucial too. Ferrari is locked in an intense battle with Mercedes and Red Bull for 2nd place in the Constructors' Championship. Mercedes currently leads by 25 points with 6 races remaining. Every point matters, and Hamilton's public backing of the team sends a powerful message to both his current and former colleagues. But there's something even more significant buried in Hamilton's words. He talks about Ferrari's standards, saying progress alone isn't enough. This is Ferrari, after all, a team with a legacy built on excellence, not moral victories. Hamilton is acknowledging the pressure while simultaneously buying the team time to find their winning formula. The emotional intelligence on display here is remarkable. Hamilton mentions his pride in the team, his desire to deliver for the passionate Ferrari fans known as the Tifosi, and his absolute belief that success is coming. This isn't empty motivation. It's a world champion taking ownership of a shared mission. What makes this even more compelling is Hamilton's recent form. He's finally matching Leclerc's pace consistently, something that took months to achieve after joining Ferrari. The raw speed is there, the racecraft remains world-class, but the results haven't followed due to circumstances largely beyond his control. Hamilton's statement ends with the iconic Ferrari battle cry, "Forza Ferrari." Two simple words that carry the weight of decades of racing history, passionate fans, and uncompromising ambition. It's a declaration that, despite the setbacks, despite the penalties, despite the headlines, he remains fully committed to Ferrari's mission. This isn't just about one driver's response to a disappointing race weekend. It's about leadership, about reframing failure as fuel for future success, and about the mindset required to compete at the highest level of motorsport. Hamilton is showing us that champions aren't defined by avoiding setbacks. They're defined by how they respond to them. Singapore might have ended in frustration, but Hamilton's response proves why he remains one of the most compelling figures in Formula One, turning adversity into inspiration, one Instagram post at a time. Did Red Bull just solve their biggest Formula One puzzle? The answer might surprise you, and it all happened during one incredible weekend in Singapore that nobody saw coming. What if I told you that a single race result could completely change everything we thought we knew about this championship battle? Well, buckle up, because the Singapore Grand Prix just delivered exactly that kind of bombshell revelation. Here's the thing about Formula One that casual fans often miss. It's not just about having the fastest car overall. It's about having a car that can perform across every single type of circuit on the calendar. And for months, Red Bull has been wrestling with one massive question that was keeping engineers awake at night. Let me paint you the picture. After dominating Formula One like nobody had ever seen before, Red Bull suddenly found themselves in unfamiliar territory. Their car was fast on some tracks, but struggling on others. The pattern was becoming clear and frankly terrifying for their championship hopes. The issue boiled down to something called downforce balance. Think of downforce like the invisible hand that pushes your car down onto the track, giving you grip through corners. Some circuits need lots of it, others need very little. Red Bull had been absolutely flying at low downforce tracks like Monza and Baku, where Verstappen looked untouchable. But high downforce circuits? That was their kryptonite. Singapore represents the ultimate high downforce challenge. It's a street circuit with tight corners, elevation changes, and demands maximum grip. For the past few years, it had been Red Bull's nightmare. In fact, it was the only track where they lost a race during their record-breaking season just 2 years ago. The writing was on the wall, and it didn't look good. Enter Max Verstappen, doing what he does best. Despite starting the weekend with legitimate concerns about whether their car could even compete, something magical happened. From Friday practice onwards, the Red Bull looked different. Not just competitive, but genuinely threatening for victory. The weekend started with Verstappen immediately finding rhythm. In qualifying, he came agonizingly close to pole position, losing out to Mercedes' George Russell by mere tenths. But here's what nobody expected. He looked comfortable doing it. No dramatic setup changes, no desperate attempts to find speed. The car just worked. Race day brought its own drama. Red Bull made a controversial tire choice, starting Verstappen on soft compounds while most competitors chose mediums. The strategy was risky, potentially brilliant, and ultimately costly. The idea was simple. Get a jump on Russell at the start and build an early lead. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity. Rain had hit Marina Bay hours before the race, leaving track conditions uncertain. The soft tire gamble might have paid dividends in those tricky opening laps, but the track dried quicker than anticipated. Verstappen couldn't capitalize on Russell's potentially vulnerable position and suddenly found himself fighting an uphill battle. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Despite the strategic setback, despite starting on the wrong tire, despite complaining over the radio that his car felt like driving with a handbrake engaged, Verstappen still managed to finish second. He matched Russell's pace throughout most of the race and held off a charging Lando Norris in the closing stages. Laurent Mekies, Red Bull's racing director, couldn't hide his excitement after the race. His comments revealed just how significant this result truly was. Fighting for victory at Singapore, he explained, meant everything after their recent successes at completely different circuit types. They had finally proven their improvements weren't just low downforce specific. The technical side of this breakthrough is worth understanding. Red Bull had brought minor updates to Singapore. Small revisions to their car that seemed to unlock something special. These weren't revolutionary changes, but rather fine-tuning adjustments that appeared to solve their high downforce puzzle. What makes this even more remarkable is the context of Verstappen's championship fight. He's currently trailing Oscar Piastri by 63 points with limited races remaining. Every weekend matters, and Singapore represented a potential disaster scenario. Instead, it became a statement of intent. The tire strategy deserves deeper examination because it illustrates Red Bull's aggressive mindset. Starting on softs when everyone else chose mediums was pure desperation disguised as calculated risk. They knew they needed something special to beat Russell from second place, and sometimes desperate times call for bold measures. The strategy backfired in terms of execution, but succeeded in proving a point. Even with compromised tire choices, even with balance issues that had Verstappen frustrated on the radio, they still delivered a podium finish at their traditionally weakest circuit type. That's not luck. That's genuine car performance. Looking ahead, the implications are enormous. Upcoming races in Austin and Mexico feature those dreaded mid-speed corners where McLaren has been dominant. If Red Bull has truly unlocked performance across the entire downforce spectrum, these venues become realistic victory targets rather than damage limitation exercises. The championship battle just got infinitely more interesting. What looked like a gradual slide toward McLaren dominance might actually be Red Bull's resurgence story. Sometimes in Formula One, answers come from the most unexpected places. Singapore didn't just give Red Bull a podium, it gave them hope, validation, and perhaps most importantly, the confidence that their recent improvements represent genuine progress rather than track-specific flukes. The season's final chapters just became unmissable. What happens when one of Formula One's most experienced drivers reaches his breaking point? At the Singapore Grand Prix, Fernando Alonso delivered a radio message so brutally direct, it instantly became legendary, threatening to cut off all communication with his team if they didn't back off. But this wasn't just a moment of frustration. It revealed something much deeper about pressure, performance, and what it takes to excel at the highest level of motorsport. Picture this. You're strapped into a rocket ship disguised as a race car, flying through the streets of Singapore at nearly 200 miles per hour. And your race engineer keeps chattering in your ear every single lap. Most drivers would politely ask for quiet time. Fernando Alonso? He delivered perhaps the most iconic threat in recent Formula One history. The Spanish veteran was having what you might call a challenging evening in Marina Bay. Everything that could go wrong seemed to be going wrong for the Aston Martin driver. First, he got jumped at the start by Isaac Hadjar from Racing Bulls, Isaac Het. Not exactly the kind of move you expect from a rookie against a two-time world champion. Then came the pit stop from hell. In Formula One, pit stops are supposed to be lightning-fast surgical procedures. Teams practice these tire changes thousands of times, aiming for stops under 3 seconds. Alonso's crew delivered a sluggish 9.2-second stop that might as well have lasted an eternity in racing terms. You could practically feel the frustration radiating from the cockpit as precious seconds and track position evaporated. But here's where things got interesting. As Alonso found himself facing a recovery drive from a compromised position, his race engineer Andrew Vizard tried to keep him informed about the race situation. Standard procedure, right? Keep the driver updated on lap counts, gaps to other cars, strategic opportunities. Vizard came on the radio with what seemed like routine information. 34 to go, Vizard announced, referring to the remaining laps in the grueling Singapore Street Circuit Marathon. What came back through the radio was pure Alonso gold. If you speak to me every lap, I will disconnect the radio. No pleasantries, no sugarcoating. Just a crystal-clear ultimatum, delivered with the kind of authority that only comes from someone who's been racing at this level for over 2 decades. It was reminiscent of another legendary radio moment from Kimi Räikkönen's famous "Leave me alone, I know what I'm doing" outburst, but with Alonso's own unique Spanish flair. This wasn't just a grumpy driver having a bad day. This was a masterclass in focus and pressure management from one of the sport's greatest minds. Alonso understood something crucial. When you're in damage control mode, trying to recover from setbacks while threading a needle through one of Formula One's most demanding circuits, every ounce of mental energy matters. Singapore is notorious for being a driver's nightmare. The humidity is crushing, the track is unforgiving, and the slightest mistake can end your race against the unforgiving concrete barriers. Add in the pressure of trying to salvage points for your team's championship fight, and you've got a recipe for sensory overload. Alonso's radio threat wasn't rudeness, it was strategic self-preservation. And it worked. The veteran driver channeled his frustration into pure performance, systematically working his way back through the field. He managed to repass Hadjar, though not without some drama. The young Racing Bulls driver was suffering from engine problems that were costing him significant lap time, but he still tried to make a fight of it when Alonso came calling. This led to another classic Alonso moment. With heavy sarcasm dripping from his voice, he awarded Hadjar the trophy for hero of the race, and it definitely wasn't meant as a compliment. The Spanish driver was clearly unimpressed with what he saw, as unnecessary resistance from a car that was clearly compromised. After the race, Alonso elaborated on his frustration. Sometimes, some battles you need to know when it's better to fight, when it's not, because probably the final result of the race could be worse for both for sure, but for him in particular. So yeah, I think some unnecessary risk. Hadjar's response? He thought Alonso was just being really grumpy about the whole situation. Fair enough. From a young driver's perspective, you never give up a position without a fight. But from Alonso's viewpoint, with decades of racecraft experience, he could see the bigger picture, that sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. The drama wasn't over yet. Lewis Hamilton became the next target of Alonso's ire after initially finishing ahead of the Spaniard. But Hamilton's Ferrari was suffering from brake problems, leading to multiple track limit violations, and eventually a 5-second time penalty that promoted Alonso to 7th place. When the penalty was announced, Alonso's reaction was explosive. "I cannot believe it," he repeated over the radio, before asking the rather concerning question, "Is it safe to drive with no brakes?" Through all the chaos, controversy, and radio gold, Alonso demonstrated why he remains one of Formula One's most compelling figures. His threat to disconnect the radio wasn't just about wanting quiet, it was about a champion demanding the mental space needed to perform miracles behind the wheel. The 6 points Alonso eventually earned from his 7th place finish might seem modest, but they're crucial for Aston Martin's fight for 5th place in the Constructors' Championship. More importantly, his Singapore performance reminded everyone why this 43-year-old driver is still considered one of the absolute best in the business. Sometimes the most honest moments in sports come not from prepared statements or media interviews, but from raw, unfiltered reactions under pressure. Alonso's radio threat gave us a glimpse into the mind of a perfectionist, operating at the absolute limit, where every word, every distraction, every unnecessary input can be the difference between success and failure. That's the beauty of Formula One radio communications. They reveal the human drama behind the helmets and heroics. Did you know that sometimes the biggest battles in Formula One happen between drivers fighting for 11th place? What unfolded at the Singapore Grand Prix between rookie Isaac Hadjar and two-time world champion Fernando Alonso proves that every position matters in this sport. And the drama that followed their intense wheel-to-wheel combat has left the racing world talking. Picture this scene: Marina Bay Circuit, lap 37 of the Singapore Grand Prix. The humid night air thick with tension as a 1-year-old rookie in a struggling Racing Bulls car refuses to yield to one of the most decorated drivers in Formula One history. What happened next would spark a war of words that perfectly encapsulates the generational divide and different philosophies that exist in modern Formula One. Let me take you back to how this all started. Isaac Hadjar, essentially a rookie despite technically being in his 2nd season, qualified 18th on the grid. 2 spots behind him sat Fernando Alonso, the 4-year-old Spanish maestro who has seen it all in his illustrious career. From the very beginning, you could sense this was going to be an interesting battle. The opening laps played out like a chess match. Alonso, with his trademark racecraft, quickly dispatched Oliver Behrman's Haas and set his sights on Hadjar. On lap 3, the veteran made his move, diving down the inside of the hairpin turn with surgical precision. It seemed like the natural order was restored, experience over youth. proven pace over potential. But Formula One races are marathons, not sprints, and strategy can change everything in an instant. A slow pit stop for Aston Martin handed the position back to Hadjar, and this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. The young Racing Bulls driver was nursing a significant engine problem that was affecting his straight-line speed, yet he refused to simply roll over and let Alonso through. For over 30 laps, Hadjar employed every defensive technique in the book. He positioned his car strategically, used DRS zones to his advantage, and fought tooth and nail to maintain his position. This wasn't reckless driving. It was calculated racecraft from a driver who understood that every point matters in Formula One, especially when your team is battling for championship position. Alonso, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated. Here was a driver with 32 Grand Prix victories, 98 podiums, and 2 world championships being held up by a rookie in a compromised car. The Spanish driver's patience was wearing thin as precious seconds ticked away, potentially costing both drivers better finishing positions. The climax came on lap 37 when the two cars went wheel to wheel in a thrilling side-by-side battle. Alonso finally found the gap he needed and swept past Hadjar, but his emotions boiled over on the team radio. In a moment that would become headline news, he sarcastically declared, "Trophy for hero of the race," a cutting remark aimed squarely at the young driver who had just cost him valuable time. But Hadjar wasn't intimidated by the legend's frustration. In post-race interviews, the Racing Bulls driver fired back with remarkable confidence for someone so early in his career. He defended his racing, emphasizing that he kept it clean and within the rules throughout their battle. Then came the moment that perfectly captured the generational clash. Hadjar called Alonso grumpy and suggested that if the two-time champion couldn't enjoy a good, fair fight, that was his problem. This response reveals something profound about the new generation of Formula One drivers. Unlike previous eras, where rookies might defer to established champions, today's young drivers come into the sport with unwavering self-belief. They've grown up watching these legends on television, but they don't feel intimidated by them. To Hadjar, Alonso is just another competitor to beat, regardless of his impressive resume. Alonso's perspective represents the old-school approach to racing. In his view, Hadjar should have recognized the futility of his situation, fighting with a compromised car against a superior package, and chosen his battles more wisely. The veteran argued that sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, and that both drivers might have achieved better results if the younger man had yielded position earlier. When told about Hadjar's grumpy comment, Alonso doubled down on his criticism. He suggested that some of the defensive moves were borderline dangerous at 300 km per hour, though he acknowledged there was no contact between the cars. His parting shot was particularly pointed, noting that Racing Bulls has a fast car but lacks points, making their defensive tactics counterproductive. The broader implications of this clash extend far beyond one race result. With Racing Bulls and Aston Martin separated by just 4 points in the Constructors' Championship, every position matters enormously. Teams are fighting not just for pride, but for millions of dollars in prize money that come with final championship standings. This incident also highlights the evolving nature of respect in Formula One. While previous generations might have expected automatic deference to champions and veterans, today's rookies demand respect through their actions on track, rather than simply granting it based on past achievements. It's a cultural shift that reflects broader changes in professional sports. The heat and humidity of Singapore added another layer to this drama. Both drivers were battling not just each other, but the brutal conditions that make the Marina Bay Circuit one of the most physically demanding races on the calendar. Hadjar mentioned dealing with headaches and vibrations from his compromised car, while Alonso faced his own frustrations with strategy and traffic. Looking ahead to the remaining races of the season, this battle has set up an intriguing subplot. Will these two continue to clash? When they find themselves fighting for position, how will their teams handle similar situations in the future? The answers to these questions could significantly impact both the drivers' and constructors' championships. What makes this story so compelling is that both drivers had valid points. Hadjar was absolutely within his rights to defend his position fairly and aggressively. That's what racing is all about. Meanwhile, Alonso's frustration was understandable, given the strategic implications of losing time in traffic. Sometimes in Formula One, there are no clear heroes or villains, just different perspectives on the same intense competition. This Singapore Grand Prix clash between Hajar and Alonso will be remembered as a defining moment for both drivers, one that showed the fearless confidence of youth and the calculating wisdom of experience in perfect conflict.